Hello and welcome to the first of two debates in the primary for Syracuse mayor, hosted by syracuse.com. I'm Chris Baker, a reporter and editor here at syracuse.com and the Post-Standard, and I'll be moderating today's debate. Joining me are the two candidates seeking the Democratic Party's nomination for mayor, Khalid and Michael Greene. Both candidates are at-large members of the Syracuse Common Council. Khalid is an author and motivational speaker in the area, and Michael works for a commercial real estate firm. The primary election is June 22nd. Early voting begins this Saturday, June 12th. We'll forego opening statements today and instead get right into questions. We flipped a coin, and Mike will answer the first question today, which is about public safety. Mike, Syracuse has seen a significant increase in homicides and violent crime in the last year or so. What would you do as mayor to make the city a safer place?
Thanks, Chris, and thank you very much for having us today. Particularly over the last few weeks, we've seen homicides of younger people, and there's no greater tragedy than a parent having to bury their young child. So what we really need to do is put policies in place that are the best practices to improve public safety in the city of Syracuse. And that's what I've done so far in my policy platform as City for All of Us. I've identified specific areas where we can make public safety a priority in the city of Syracuse. The first thing I would say is we should have a civilian commissioner of public safety. We're not implementing best practice right now in the city. We've seen just over the last year when the mayor and his team turned off ShotSpotter, which made the police department essentially flying blind when it came to identifying bullets that are being fired in the city. The Citizen Review Board is another area where we don't have good communication and collaboration between the community and the police department because there's not a level of trust. That's something I've been pushing forward even on the council. When I put forward a resolution to empower the people that work on the Citizen Review Board, Raynette Relaford, who's the administrator, Cliff Ryan, who's a board member, who came to this city and said we need 4 more positions. I put forward a resolution to vote for 2 of them, and that's the difference between Councilor Bay and I, who did not support that. But the other thing I would say is we need to be investing in our young people. They need to have other programming. There needs to be programming in the parks. There needs to be programming after-school job activities. If we invest in young people, we'll see less crime on our streets.
Thank you. Khalid, same question. What would you do to make Syracuse a safer place?
Again, thanks, Chris, and to syracuse.com for the invitation. Proximity matters. I'm a big supporter of community policing. I have a plan that includes an extensive precinct program that would put police officers on neighborhood business corridors, which I think a lot of businesses certainly would applaud. Creating an opportunity for proximity gives police officers opportunity to create relationships with people within the communities. I was one of the initial people who suggested PAL. Fortunately, this administration is doing that. I talked about the fact that officers who might coach in youth football and the like, building a relationship with kids, would ultimately do the same with their parents. Proximity matters. I also make the argument is that if I have an affinity for you, it's much harder for me to injure you. I took a ride-along 2 weeks ago with officers who engage in what I'll loosely call gun violence suppression. And I believe the tactics that they use, which are simply demonstrating or showing their presence to people as a deterrent to violence, speak to the very idea I'm talking about in terms of proximity. Creating a comprehensive police precinct program, creating relationships where people become more comfortable communicating with police, building that trust is really the only way to build or create community police camaraderie.
Thank you both. Follow-up question, and we'll have just 30 seconds for this one. There's been a lot made of the staffing in the Syracuse Police Department. Do you think we need more police on the force? Do we need fewer police, or are we at just the right number? And Khalid, I'll start with you.
You need to fill out the police department completely. Even when I talk about the idea I have for a comprehensive police precinct program, it makes it a lot easier on those officers when they're not forced into a position to do a lot of hours. Also, shoring up our police department reduces the need for overtime. And so it reduces our overtime, it reduces our pension costs. It's a more fiscally responsible thing to do.
Same question, Mike.
Yeah, so I'll just respond a little bit to Councilor Bay. I haven't seen this comprehensive plan, and I don't know where a voter would be able to find that. But if you're talking about putting more police officers in storefronts around the city, that means taking officers either off the road that are now responding to calls, or it means hiring more police officers. So I think policy details matter, and that's something that I put forward, policy details, and I don't think Councilor Bay has. I think right now we have the right number of police officers, and I would not expand the force. I would take my civilian commissioner of public safety to get more people that are on desk duty to try to get them out onto the road.
I like this effort to draw a distinction. Do I get to reply to him at some point?
15 seconds.
Yeah. First of all, a civilian police chief doesn't have the same experience as a police officer on the street. When you're talking to a person that's involved in a certain thing, I don't know how you guide them with no real understanding of what they go through from day to day. I think it's irresponsible to simply suggest a civilian police officer without that understanding. Secondarily, I'm not mayor yet, which is why you haven't seen the execution of a precinct plan.
A report last week from Chris Libanati detailed the Syracuse Police Department's big increase in marijuana tickets as pot was being legalized. It found that 90% of those ticketed were black, while the city's population is just 30% black. The department said those pretext stops helped them get guns off the street. Are you comfortable with how the department uses pretext stops to search for guns? And what would you be doing as mayor in the wake of this report? Mike, we'll start with you.
No, I think it's an example of how our police department is fundamentally broken. And I will absolutely defend my position to have a civilian commissioner of public safety, because policies like this are the exact reason that show that a career police officer is not well equipped to bring about the reform that we need. If you talk about right now in the city of Syracuse, we have a problem with gun violence, yet the police department turned off ShotSpotter and was flying blind to know when bullets are being fired, yet at the same time said it was necessary to pull over essentially every young black and brown person on the south side and near west side. It's terrible policy. There's no other way around it. And if you had someone that was a civilian in charge of that department, they'd be able to look at stats and find out that, hey, doing this type of thing creates huge amounts of distrust between the community and the police department, and ultimately is counterproductive. What's happening here is totally unacceptable, and I think the administration needs to be held accountable for it.
Khalid, same question.
Oh, can you repeat the question?
Sure thing. We're looking at this report that we had about essentially racial profiling in the police department. 90% of the people ticketed for marijuana stops were black, while the city's population is just 30% black. Are you comfortable with how the department uses these pretext stops to search for guns? And what would you be doing as mayor in the wake of this report?
Of course not. You know, I can't speak for Councilor Greene, but I've had family members come home with gashes in their foreheads from police flashlights. Not sure if he did. I have nephews who came home with gashes in their foreheads from police flashlights. Not sure if he did. I find it interesting that he's the expert on subject matter. Absolutely not. I'm not in support of. I also think it's unfair to say that ShotSpotter was turned off. It was a fiscal decision on, really in defense of this administration. They wasn't sure if they could pay for it, so they didn't. Once the money came back through, they paid for it. It was a fiscal decision. It wasn't a decision to turn it off. They did not want to turn it off. And so let's be clear about that. I'm not in support of it. Certainly wouldn't support that. A top-down approach. The mayor should be responsible for how his chief performs. That's all the civilian you need. A top-down approach to our police department and how it operates is what we need, and that's certainly what I plan to implement.
Chris, can I
Mike, 15 seconds to the final word.
Yeah, so first of all, I would say ShotSpotter's less expensive than creating an entire gun suppression unit, so it was not a good fiscal decision to do that. The other thing I would say is DA Fitzpatrick said that he wouldn't be prosecuting these tickets. So the fact right now that the city of Syracuse's policy is to the right of DA Fitzpatrick is not a good place for the city to be.
Thank you both. We're going to move on and talk a little bit about jobs and the economy. Khalid, we'll start with you on this question. There are nearly 20,000 unemployed people in Syracuse. Government doesn't necessarily create jobs, but can play a role in business development and steering people toward work. How do you plan to get people who aren't working into the workforce?
Yeah, Chris, I appreciate it. I often talk about using entry-level employment as a gateway for long-term employment, especially for people who are unemployed, chronically unemployed. I've demonstrated this much as a legislature with a similar program I negotiated with Home Headquarters some years ago to provide contracts for certain contractors, neighborhood residential contractors, so that they can increase employment in their respective businesses. This is the type of thing I've already done before, and I wasn't mayor. A similar thing could be done now. Entry-level employment, I'll give another example. When I negotiated with Upstate and Krause to leverage our eds and meds in an effort to attract a vendor. The last administration couldn't cross the finish line with it. I would attempt to do that again. We need to use what we have at our disposal to attract entry-level employment, to give people access to opportunity. We've always spent a lot of time providing training for people. People train for 14 weeks, four months, no pay, and then get no placement. To be able to train people immediately, pay them immediately is what we need to do to get people right back in the workforce, and hopefully some upward mobility will be what they experience. But I think that's what we have to do right off the rip to start to put a dent in unemployment.
Thank you. Mike, same question.
I think the problem in the city of Syracuse right now is we've been trying this top-down approach, that if we give the right tax breaks to big corporations and developers downtown, that it'll trickle down to our neighborhoods. It hasn't worked. Just last week, I wrote an op-ed detailing how we can reform SIDA, the Syracuse Industrial Development Agency, to rein in some of these more generous tax breaks that aren't even needed. We can bring ourselves in line with places like Buffalo, Rochester, Albany, that are having less generous tax breaks and are using that money to invest in the communities, investing in small businesses, investing in our infrastructure, investing in our schools. That's the bottom-up approach that we should be doing instead of top-down. A couple other things I would say. We need to do more to get internet access to people that don't have it. That's something that's part of my platform that's really important. And again, if you go through my economic development platform, A City for All of Us, there are details there that aren't in Councilor Bay's platform. He's been talking about unemployment, but the details of how we'd get people back to work has not been spelled out. The only thing I've seen for a specific policy was an article with the Daily Orange where he talked about building a machine where we would convert snow into steam energy. But again, I haven't seen any specific details about that, and it's not clear if he's can talk to any scientists to figure out that even makes sense. So we need more details and more specifics.
Yeah, I have to respond to that. First of all, a bottom-up approach is when you talk about empowering the individual, male or female, to take care of their family. That's first and foremost. If I can't feed my family, there's not much else I can do. If people are not working, understanding that 80% of government revenue is generated from the individual, if that is not your primary target, then everything else is a gimmick. You hear me say all the time, Chris, that the brick and mortar of government is working people and a stabilized tax base. That should be our number one priority. In regards to his comment about snow and energy, yeah, Professor Charlie Driscoll from Syracuse University, his idea initially to create a archetype that he can demonstrate, or create a prototype that he can show that would melt and filter snow, and use that as a process for creating energy. Now, let me add to you in regards to your comment about experts as well. A room full of geothermal engineers at Center of Excellence, with Linda Irvin, Monica Williams, Helen Hudson, all present to witness, who all agreed to the same thing. CNS engineers, same thing. Maybe you should reach out to them and ask them what they thought about the idea. It's been discussed for 10 years.
Like final thought?
Yeah, so, I did read
You
about it.
asked about experts, so talk to the experts. You don't have to talk to me.
I read about it, and the idea that people would be taking snow off their yard and sending it to someplace and get cash for it does not seem realistic. I don't think we should be putting the future of Syracuse on a magic snow machine. It's not the right way we should be doing things.
All right, let's move on from this topic. We're going to move on to talk a little bit about Interstate 81, which is going to really fall to the next mayor of Syracuse. Mike, we'll start with you on this question. The community grid appears to be a certainty, and demolition of the viaduct and new construction will likely begin next year. The next mayor then will be tasked with stewarding the city through the first phase of the biggest construction project in a generation. What keeps you up at night about the 81 project, and what would you do about it?
What keeps me up at night is the idea that the residents that live in the immediate area surrounding the viaduct won't be listened to. So what I did is, in my plan for using the federal relief funds, I put together an idea of having someone or some people be the point person that would be the advocate for the city of Syracuse and its residents while this project goes on. Someone that will listen to the residents to make sure that dust isn't in their homes, that noise isn't disrupting them, that they're not being displaced. What we don't want to see is a gentrified community where people that live there now are not able to come back. The other thing we need to make sure that this person that's heading up the effort does is make sure that locals get jobs, that they should be part of that effort. The construction jobs are going to them. That's an important thing to do too. But the end result of this process should be an attempt to try to rebuild the old 15th Ward, to have a middle class neighborhood where people can feel safe and secure in their homes.
Good. Khalid, same question. What keeps you up at night about the 81 project, and what would you do about it?
Besides the respiratory issues I acquired being a young kid living in that area, and I still live in proximity to the viaduct, it is obviously the concern that the people receive a mixed message about what's happening. Unbeknownst to my opponent here, there's been many public forums long before now on the 81 viaduct where the community had a lot of input, specifically the Pioneer Homes community, the Toomey Abbott community, the Central Village community, McKinney Manor. Myself, Monica Williams, Helen Hudson, along with members of the DOT, many of those, I'm pretty sure the media was there, where people gave And that alone did a lot to guide some of the decisions relative to 81 now. What we're seeing now, as many of you know, is really has morphed a lot of times because of public input. So to suggest that there hasn't been any is false. There have been a lot of discussions, but the fact that making sure that people can return to their homes is most important. We have a tendency as a city from 1839 Harrison Street, where the predominantly black population was before government-ordered demolition moved them into the 15th Ward, to the government-ordered demolition in 1960 moved my mother and her family into the 18th Ward. Again, experience matters. For persons who have experienced these kind of things and who still live in proximity to the viaduct, I think are most informed and understanding of what the people near the viaduct need.
All right, thank you both. We are about at our halfway point, so we're going to take a quick breather. We've got 6 or 7 fast-paced questions. We'll call it the lightning round. Change of pace here a little bit. We'll ask a series of questions to each of you. I'd like you to respond with one-word answers or as close to a one-word answer as you can get. Khalid, I'll start with you. Who has the best pizza in Syracuse?
OIP.
Pavones.
Mike, we'll start with you. Should the Columbus Monument be taken down?
Yes.
I'll leave that to the people involved in the discussion.
Are we not involved in the discussion?
You can laugh all you want, but it's a cultural issue, not a political one. If
you wanna be mayor of
people want to
Syracuse,
paint, listen,
it'll be a
if the
political
people
one.
want to paint over Martin Luther King's face, then I'll get involved because that's a cultural issue, not political. What hasn't happened with this mayor, he hasn't sat down with the natives and the Italians together
We're going to go back
to hear their issues. That's his
To
failure.
the questions here. Speaking of this mayor,
Let's
Khalid,
do it.
Who did you vote for in the 2017 mayoral race?
I voted for Juanita Perez Williams.
Mike,
Juanita Perez Williams.
back to you, Mike. Dogs or cats?
Oh, dogs.
Dogs.
Khalid, starting with you. Have you gotten the COVID-19 vaccine?
No.
Mike.
Yes.
Back to you, Mike. What's your favorite coffee spot in the city?
Recess.
Cafe Cabal, you already know
We got
that.
one coming up. And Khalid, final question. What's the best city park?
Kirk Park.
I live near Barry, so I got to say Barry Park.
There we go. All right. Back to some more serious stuff. Let's talk about Mayor Walsh a bit. Both of you plan to challenge Ben Walsh in November, and both of you have spent several years working alongside his administration as common councilors. Mike, I think this question will start with you. In his first term, what grade would you give Mayor Walsh and why?
I'd give him a C, and the reasoning is I don't think he's done anything offensive. He's never done anything particularly wrong, but what he hasn't done is articulate a clear vision of how we can move forward. I don't think Syracuse Surge is a serious plan to empower all of our neighborhoods. That's why I put together my policy platform, A City for All of Us. It's 14 different policies, everything from economic development to transportation to police reform. And it's a progressive vision of what the city could become if we had leadership that had a clear idea of where we want to go and was unwilling to fight and was willing to fight for it. That's something I've been, since I've been on the council, I've been unafraid to pick fights when I think the residents need someone to be an advocate. If you go back to 2018, the police union contract, the mayor negotiated a contract that gave raises without any increase in accountability. I was one of 2 councilors to vote against it. If you look at Interstate CEO came to the city for a sweetheart deal for real estate downtown, I stood up and said it wasn't the right thing to do. So I think you need a mayor that has both a clear vision of where you want to go, but also someone that's not afraid to challenge the status quo when residents need it.
Interesting.
Well, same question. What grade would you give Mayor Walsh as mayor and why?
I'll give him a B- for effort. The unfortunate circumstances, there was no activity. A lot of ideas, no movement. I've made arguments before that we have to be careful as a city to be creative at the taxpayer's expense, kind of like my opponent here. A lot of great ideas, very big, but also very expensive. Also, when you talk about picking fights, I pushed Ben in the box, which took 2 years against the odds and still got it done. I pushed local hiring, 2 years, still got it done. I pushed warrants for inspection, 2 years, appreciate your vote, still got it done. When you talk about fighting against the odds, despite what anybody says, I believe I've demonstrated a greater ability for that than even you and this mayor that's in there now. I always add to the fact that I have 7 years of elected experience on both the mayor and my opponent. and certainly 10 years on the other two candidates. I think that should say something as well.
Mike, I'll give you 15 seconds to respond if you'd like.
Yeah, I think over the last 10 years, Councilor Bay has pushed forward some good legislation. But I will say is over the last 3 years since I've been on the council, I've been happy to stand up for residents when I think they need it.
All right, let's move on. This is sort of an open-ended question. And Khalid, we'll start with you on this one. Executives need to have a big vision for the long-term future of a city. So let's think big for a moment. What's one great idea you have that could reshape the city for the next generation?
You know, I would never do with other people's money what I don't do with my own. I'm not a gambler. While I am a creative person and a part of the creative community, I just don't sacrifice. I'm a calculated risk taker, not a risk taker. What we need coming out of the type of pandemic we experience is stability, not more cost. And if you talk to most families about the ideas that's being presented that's costing us more money, attacking on more fees, I'm pretty sure they'll echo the same sentiment. What we need is stability, which is the greatest opportunity for long-term sustainability. The idea is how do we prepare Syracuse for generations tomorrow? Quick gimmicks that burn out in 3 to 5 years, 10 years is not adequate. What do you do to shore up families and make sure families are sustainable? If you're not talking about families, if you're not talking about households, which is what neighborhoods and communities and cities are built on, then I don't know what you're doing.
Mike, big idea for the future of the city.
Well, the good thing is we don't have to have this as a hypothetical. The city's been given $123 million from the federal government, and how we spend that money is going to dictate a lot of where the future goes. I put forward a plan that I sent to the administration outlining how we should do it. And as finance chair, the two main things I was focused on is one, reducing our deficit. Every year we spend more money than we take in. We need to invest in ways that we can stop that. So that means investing in things like our sanitation infrastructure so that we get new trucks that are automated so that our sanitation workers aren't hurting themselves and we can save money that way. It means investing in water infrastructure so that our pipes aren't breaking and we need to spend money to fix them. It means investing in our road infrastructure so that we're not always spending money filling potholes. But it also means growing in an equitable way. So investing more in affordable housing to grow our tax base, investing in municipal dark fiber so that we can get internet to people that need it. That'll help grow our tax base and reduce that deficit. And there is a contrast once again here with Councilor Bay. He said to put $60 million into the rainy day fund. But when you look at the federal regulations, you're not allowed to spend that money in that way. So if we followed his plan, we would literally need to give back $60 million to the federal government. And putting aside the fact that it's not allowed, even if it was, it's still not a good idea because what we should be doing is reducing that deficit. Instead, if we put in the rainy day fund, you would just be keeping that deficit but kicking the can down the road. So eventually the tax increase would still come.
Split 30 seconds.
Always interesting when people don't read the rules correctly. You can't spend the money on anything new, but existing efforts you can. And when you talk about sustainability, what I talked about was putting money in our fund balance to be able to fill our budget gap for 7 to 10 years. I don't know how you make an argument against that when you talk about stabilizing our economy. You know, and it's a matter of really understanding what we're talking about, not looking for sound bites, not taking cheap shots at me. They've done that often to try to gain support. Know what you're talking about and deliver.
It's not a cheap shot. We would not be able to spend that money. We would not be able to spend that money.
Actually, reread the rules. You read them wrong.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I wish the budget director was here. He would tell you. For as long as it fit into things that we were already paying for, you can do it. It's the same reason for why they say that they could use it for police.
You said to spend it on to offset future tax increases. Is that correct?
I said to sustain it. Right. That's right.
You're not allowed to spend it to offset future tax increases.
That is not a statement, and I didn't say future tax increases. That's not what I said.
All right, let's move on.
What I said was you use $60 million for budget gaps. It's not future tax increases.
You're not allowed to put it in the reserve fund. It's explicit in the federal rules.
Reread the rules. It's not explicit.
Let's move on from here, and hopefully we'll be able to get to the bottom of some of these rules in the next.
Just make sure he quotes me correctly.
I'd like to ask a question, brief question, and I'll give you each 45 seconds for this one about Destiny USA. You might have seen some recent reporting about the fiscal troubles that Destiny is having. Khalid, I'll start with you. What can lawmakers be doing now to keep Destiny from becoming the next shopping town?
It's tough because, you know, unfortunately or not, or fortunately, depending on the persons who may have been supporters or adverse to the Destiny program, you've had a lot of naysayers over the years. You had a lot of support for over the years. Destiny is an asset. I think we need to do what we can to ensure that it finds or re-establishes stability. And we need it. You know, the amount of sales tax we acquire from Destiny has been very helpful to the county and the city. And so whatever we can do, whatever our state legislators and federal legislators can do to shore up destiny. The same that they've done even for small business. We may require for those mom and pop shops in there that are going under, because that's what it's about, and some of those retail stores, they may need some stimulus money themselves to shore up their operation.
Thank you, Mike. Same question.
Well, first of all, I think Destiny USA is example number one as to why we need to reform SIDA. The tax breaks that were given to Destiny were totally unwarranted and something we should make sure it doesn't happen again. But right now, we're stuck with this bad situation. And if I were mayor, what I would be doing is meeting with the owners of it monthly to figure out what their plan is, to make sure they're held accountable, to make sure that there's a plan going forward. At the end of the day, it's going to have to probably be redeveloped into not just exclusively retail, because the market for retail is diminishing with online shopping. So there's going to have to eventually be some sort of plan that involves affordable housing or some community uses. So we need to make sure they're on top of it so that we don't lose all those jobs and all that valuable real estate.
So we've got time for just a couple more questions here. Do something a little unorthodox. I'm going to give you each a chance to ask your opponent one question. Mike, I'll start with you. And while you take a moment to think about what you'd like to ask, I'd just like to remind anybody watching that this is the first of two debates we'll have in the Syracuse mayoral primary between our two Democratic candidates. We'll have a debate tomorrow airing between the two Republican candidates for mayor, Janet Berman and Thomas Babylon. Like this one, that debate was pre-recorded and will be aired on syracuse.com. Mike, I think I said I'll start with you on this question, give you a chance to ask a question to Khalid, and Khalid will give you 60 seconds to respond.
So I think the voters deserve to know what we're going to try to accomplish when you get in office. So my question to Councilor Bay would be, when are you going to release a policy platform?
Well, I'm going to tell you something you may not know. Or you may know it, you just haven't said it. It's a little dangerous when you're running for office and you have an incumbent who the things we talk about early on starts to implement them. I'm sure you noticed that. This is not my first rodeo. This is my fifth election. I always know how to communicate to people effectively. Not to you specifically, because you're one person, but to people effectively so that they understand the issues that I support. When I'm saying to you that you have to shore up families, you have to create employment opportunities, entry-level employment, which is the easiest that you can create because there are no training requirements, and you still act as if you don't understand, then I say you're playing politics, right? And so entry-level employment opportunities, stabilizing the home, building 1 and 2 family homes to improve our tax base are the type of things you heard me say long before now. But you act like you don't understand them now. You even agreed with me before now. I find this interesting.
Can I respond to that real quickly?
Sure, 15 seconds.
So I would just say, I agree, Councilor Bay and I share a lot of goals. We share a lot of things we want to do.
Oh, now we
but the
do.
difference is that I have a clear plan of how to achieve it, and he's just identified the goals. The voters deserve to know specifically how we would tackle these issues.
Khalid, same opportunity, a chance to ask Mike a question.
Yeah, well, first I'm gonna beg to differ that his plan is that detailed. I read your plan. But I'll ask this, you talked before, you introduced the idea before, which I thought was pretty misleading, and I think that's why you kind of pulled it back, that you introduced over 300 pieces of legislation. Now, to us, we know what you mean. You chair committees, but to the person who doesn't know, it sounds like you sponsored 300 pieces of legislation. I'm sure you know you did that on purpose. Why else would you dial it back and change how you present that? How do you justify that kind of statement? And you know it's not true.
It is true that I introduced 300 pieces of legislation, and the reason I introduced those is because I was chair of 2 of the most important committees in the council.
It's the mayor's legislation,
I'll
not
answer.
yours.
So I was the chair of the Public Works Committee and the Finance Committee now. Those are 2 very active committees, and I'm proud of the work that I did on it. And if you talk about when I was chair of the Public Works Committee, we were super productive. You'd look at how we got the pilot the snow clearance program in place. We did the Verizon 5G agreement. We got the streetlights that are one of the key things for the administration. So yes, I introduced the legislation by working with the administration, but we got a lot done during that time period, and I don't have any shame in saying that we did do a lot while I was chair of the Public Works Committee.
I got my 15 seconds to respond to that.
Sure.
We all, as committee chairs, introduce legislation. You made the statement to suggest contrast because I've written more, according to our clerk, more legislation than anybody in the past 25 years. So you had to say something to take the wind out of that statement, and that's what you did.
All right, we've got time for one final question. What I'd like to do is give you each 1 minute to answer this question. And where are we? I think, Mike, I'll start with you on this one. You're both Democrats. You're both hoping to take on Ben Walsh in November. What makes you a better challenger to run against Walsh than your opponent?
So I think the reason is that, again, I've identified a clear policy platform of how we can go about changing the city. And I think that's what's required. The mayor has not done anything terrible, so you've got to give people a clear alternative of what we can do. And that's what a city for all of us is. It's a detailed platform of what a progressive Syracuse would look like. So I think that's one thing, but the other thing is from a campaign infrastructure standpoint, I've been out there trying to do as much as I can to raise money. I've raised over $100,000. It's more than 3 times what my opponent has. And I think money is the worst part of politics, but to be realistic, Mayor Walsh has hundreds of thousands of dollars, huge name recognition, and the most influential family in Syracuse. So to run a viable campaign, you've got to be able to do that. So when you combine the infrastructure I've put together, as well as the details of my policy plan, I think I'm the best candidate to run against Mayor Walsh.
It's my turn.
Question, yes.
Here's what's interesting. When you talk about, or you demonstrate an understanding of the brick and mortar operation of government, when 80% of government revenue made from people, the remaining 20 from land. That is how we operate. Local, state, federal, doesn't matter how you cut it. And you talk about the need to reduce unemployment. You talk about the need to improve our housing and reduce the tax delinquency we've experienced in our city, put more properties back online so that they perform. And you act as if that is not a plan to shore up our city, then you really don't know what you're doing. Let's be clear. The other thing I want to add is this. Last I knew, money didn't walk into the booth and voted. So I find it interesting. Yeah, of course you have to catch yourself and say, well, people are not really for money in politics, but yet you still paraded it as if that was the reason why people should vote for you. When your money starts to walk into the booth and vote, then I'll be concerned about that, right? But I've raised my money from the people, grassroots. That's why the majority of my money, $10 and $20 and $30, came from people who live around here. That's a fact. And so when you talk, sorry, my time is up, but let's be honest about it, all right?
We will leave things there. That's going to conclude the first of our 2 Syracuse mayoral primary debates. Khalid, Mike, thank you both for joining us today. A reminder to check back tomorrow to watch the Republican primary debate. And of course, don't forget to vote in the primary if you're registered with a party. Early voting begins Saturday, June 12th, and Election Day is Tuesday, June 22nd. For details on how and where to vote, visit the Onondaga County Board of Elections website at ongov.net/elections or check back regularly with syracuse.com. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to the candidates. Stay tuned to syracuse.com for complete coverage throughout the primary and the mayor's race.